Thanks very much, Ngwiza. Very graphic picture from your African village background on the process of evangelism, but the truth that God's been there before. Well, through this week, we've been just very, very grateful for the input of Roy Moran and John King, and thankful for them to be for being with us this week and giving themselves. We appreciate their input. And what we're trying to provoke ourselves to think about is there an Acts of the Apostles type growth that we could engage in much more? Could that sort of thing be today? And I sense that God is really working on unbelief in our own hearts, of all the experience that we've had that this is the way it is, to really cause us to think more, is there a better way of doing what God is calling us to do in seeing his kingdom unleashed in the earth? So, John, great to have you with us again. Can I remind us all that if you have questions from what John is sharing, please send them through to the question host in the chat rooms, please, and we'll pick them up after John has spoken to us. So, John, thanks very much, and over to you.
Thank you. I am very grateful for the opportunity to be with you each of these 4 days and to share a bit with you and try to respond to some of the questions on the days that Roy has been speaking. I apologize. There are more than 7 pages of questions that have been submitted in the last 3 days. So obviously we haven't gotten to enough of those quickly enough. I have made the commitment that I will personally respond to each of those. There is a Google Docs that has been prepared, and your questions that are submitted today will be added to that. I've started working on some of them. Unfortunately, I have a fairly heavy travel schedule the next 2 weeks, so there may be some delay, but I commit to you that I will continue to work on those questions. One very patient and persistent young lady has written hers in at least twice. I didn't look through all of yesterday's, and maybe 3 times. And the question was, what if you have ordinary people that you would like to release, but they're not willing? What do you do in that situation? And I would say, begin praying about it. We always start with prayer. We end with prayer. We bathe everything with prayer. And that's not being trite. It's about us really listening to the Spirit of God at work. What we've observed in our experience is that hesitancy can come from multiple places. For some, it is their fear that they are not equipped well enough. And so with people that is their underlying reluctance, I would say model well the behavior that you're wanting them to take up. Equip them well. One of the reasons we keep coming back to keeping the question list that you use in a Discovery Bible study setting very simple is it's easier for people to learn. In a lot of the churches in the U.S. where I do training, there are people who say it gets boring asking the same questions over and over again. Can't we change the questions up for interest's sake? If you're not intending to equip anyone else, change them all you want. Now, if you want to equip people who might view themselves as very ordinary, keep them simple, keep them on point, and they will learn them because of your consistency, because of your persistence. That's the reason, that's the rationale. That's why the questions have been worked on so diligently for so long and field tested very carefully. It's not to entertain those who are obese with their feeding on Scripture. It's to equip those who feel unequipped yet. Model, equip, watch them put it into practice. Coach them on the side, not correcting them in front of others and causing them to lose face, but helping them to discover what's working well, where do they need to improve, how can they improve, and then launch them out. Some won't go because they feel ill-equipped. Others won't go yet because they do not feel empowered. We've modeled a strong, holding, controlling leadership style so long that even some of the equipped won't go because no one sent them. No one's given them permission. No one has commissioned them to go out. Sometimes they're the problem, sometimes we're the problem. What a powerful passage for us to have in our devotional time. The miracle in Cornelius' situation isn't so much focused on Cornelius, it's focused on Peter. The messenger is the one who needs the vision. The messenger is the one who needs the falling of the Holy Spirit on the Gentiles like us. My prayer is that our hearts are not so hard, that it'll take repeated messages from God to which we keep responding, "No, Lord," far too long. I want to share a PowerPoint with some pictures to just sort of help you imagine what it might look like in your area, to be catalytic in involving ordinary people in the extraordinary move of God. Let me find my PowerPoint. I apologize. Fumbling around. Well, I'm not going to find it. I won't share a PowerPoint. I'll describe one. I trained one of my teammates. His name is Terry. Terry went to a church that invited us in to hold a training. And an individual came that first week thinking he was only going to be there a week and then he would bow out, was exposed to the Discovery Bible Study process, experiencing it. His name was Gordon. And Gordon was so fascinated, he decided to put it to the test. So he used the process of asking questions around a passage with young adults class. And they took to it in ways he could not anticipate. And they started being obedient. They were a part of a large church. And one of the pastoral staff's wife heard the excitement that was being stirred in this young adults class. Her name was Wendy. Wendy wasn't a part of the young adult class, but she knew Gordon well, so she asked permission to sit in on the class. She said, "I'll be in the back. I won't interfere. I won't interrupt. I know I'm not a part of the age group." And Gordon was very happy for her to join. Knew and loved Wendy and her husband and their children well. Wendy quickly learned to facilitate Discovery Bible studies. So she started using it home with her children in their family devotional time. And her daughter, McKenna, who was a high school senior, quickly learned to facilitate Discovery Bible Study. Wendy led it a couple of times and then had McKenna facilitate in their home devotional time. McKenna was the president of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes at her local public school. And she had been a good teacher. She had gathered people around her. And so she decided to experiment. And she started transitioning from the teacher focus gatherings for FCA. And she started using a discovery process. And the thing that fascinated her is the girls and the guys who had stayed on the outer edges of their group started pulling into the center. And people she had never heard answer a question became able to facilitate small discovery groups. Because you see, the whole group wasn't together. She got them in groups of 4 or 5 or 6 around tables. And she would just ask the question, and then they would discuss it in their groups. And then she would ask for 1 or 2 to share with the bigger group. And so there was this big group dynamic, but a lot of the real accountability and love and support and intercession happened in these smaller groups. So McKenna became convinced this is a process that's helpful. It'll work well. She graduated from high school, went to a small private Christian college in East Tennessee, where her older sister and an even older first cousin were already students. Early her freshman first semester, McKenna invited her older sister and her cousin. Grace was her cousin. I'm drawing a blank on the sister's name, but those 3 started practicing the Discovery Bible Study approach. And after a few weeks, when each of them was very comfortable asking the questions, they had their scripture set on a list, they stopped meeting for discovery, and they each intentionally reached out to girls on the floor of their dorm. They each of the 3 of them lived in different dorms from one another, and invited girls who were not yet Christians to participate in a Discovery Bible Study. And that had been going on for several weeks, and they were getting a good response, and other people on campus started hearing about it. And so they invited myself and 2 guys, Gordon being one of those, the second one in this chain of people, to come and do a big group event and expose more of the people on their campus to this Discovery Bible Study process. So we arrived, it was a Friday evening. They'd had a week of classes. We didn't know whether 10 would show up or 15 or 20. I would have been shocked if it was more than that. They had to get a faculty sponsor to come and be there and open up the building. And we were in a large foyer area, had some tables, had a lot of floor space, and 60 university students showed up to experience one of these Discovery Bible Studies. We got them in groups of 5 or 6 around tables or seated on the floor in small circles. And we looked at that passage from John 4, Jesus with the woman at the well, and just took them through the process of discovery. After it was over, and I had some of them share from their small groups with the bigger group, some of their answers, I asked those who were willing to raise their hands, if you had the list of questions and a list of passages, raise your hand. How many of you think you could do this? 59 hands went up. There was one young lady who was a senior, And she knew sometimes when you raise your hand, you're volunteering for something. And she wanted to hear what she was volunteering for before she raised her hand. So she kept her hand down. Well, I took out a stack of these Discovery Bible Study bookmarks. It was a real thick stack. Thankfully, I'd had enough faith to carry more than I anticipated being there. And I just started going around the room, handing each person there one of the bookmarks. It had 26 passages on one side. It had the 8 questions on the other side that we use to facilitate discovery. I didn't know anyone in the room other than the 2 guys that I was working with and McKenna. I hadn't met her sister before. I hadn't met her cousin. But Grace, her cousin, was standing near a young Chinese lady who, when I came to her, her English name was Jessie. Jessie took one of the bookmarks and I went on because I didn't know to watch. I didn't know that something unusual might happen. Jessie took the bookmark and she glanced at the passages, and then she flipped it over and very carefully and deliberately read every one of the 8 questions. And almost under her breath, she gently said, "I already do these." Well, Grace was close enough, she heard it. She was watching because Jessie had been coming to her Discovery Bible Study in her dorm. And Grace asked her, "Jessie, are you talking about what we do in the dorm?" And she said, "No. After we do our study, I Skype with my mom back home in China, and I check to make sure I was asking her the same questions on the list." Until that night, Jessie didn't know there was a bookmark, but she already knew the questions. She was not yet a believer. She hadn't professed faith in Jesus. At that point, she hadn't even gotten to the New Testament passages yet. She was still working through some Old Testament passages. It was about a year later that Jessie came to faith. But she was discipling her mother toward faith on the journey to faith. McKenna, her sister, and Grace were not anticipating that. We've seen this over and over again across sub-Saharan Africa and up into the Sahel. We're seeing glimpses of it here in the US and in Canada. It's happening often in parts of Asia. One of the reasons Jerry Trousdale has such incredible confidence in the Salt and Light family is your openness to the Holy Spirit. If you're reading through Unleashing the Kingdom, one of the obstacles that much of the global North Church has is many have practically become cessationist. We believe the Holy Spirit worked directly through inspiration to get Scripture recorded for us. But we don't believe that he's still guiding people like Philip to the Ethiopian, that he's still working on people like Peter to get them to go to Cornelius's household, that he's still preparing persons of peace like Jessie. My one word of counsel to McKenna, because I had her email address, is, McKenna, please encourage Grace, to encourage Jessie, to encourage her mother to pull together a group of her friends in China and repeat the same process with them. Not everyone that we encounter, as a matter of fact, the majority of the people we meet will not be persons of peace. One of the questioners said, "What about Saul of Tarsus? He certainly wasn't a person of peace." That's correct. And many of the people that you meet will not be persons of peace. But we want people, more and more people, to be on mission with God, aware of and anticipating that He's gone before us to some of these places, and He's already stirring up the hearts of some of the people. And when we find them and we expose them to this discovery process, they not only will come to faith, they will unlock their family. They will unlock their neighborhood. They will unlock their friendship groups by replicating this discovery process with the people they care desperately about, with the people that they want to come to know Jesus. A young man named David that I was coaching and training in this process, already a believer. He's athletic, loves to play basketball, go to the gym and work out with weights. And so he decided he would use his exercise opportunities to, as he said, fish for men. He said, "I played basketball on the courts there many times, but my heart was about to jump out of my chest the day that I went, intending to play basketball, but hoping that my ultimate goal would be to find a person of peace." And he said, we were just playing pickup basketball, and I noticed that I kept being on the same team with this young Asian young man. And during one of the breaks, we had gotten some water and we were talking. And so I just asked him a spiritual question. I opened a spiritual discussion, and he was very receptive. And so we talked some more, and we played some, and the next break we talked some more. And I asked him, "Would you be interested in discovering what the Bible says about God?" And he said, "Yes, I would love to." And so David asked him when they could meet to do this. And the young man said, 6 o'clock in the morning next Monday. My schedule is full. It's the only time that I have. Let's meet here at the community center. And David thought, there's no way a 20-year-old going to college, working in his family restaurant, lives in another city, driving back and forth, he's going to be here at 6 o'clock next Monday morning. But I've been praying about this, and so David set his alarm. He got there 5 minutes early, and the young man was sitting there waiting for him, ready to go. Over the next period of weeks and months, this young man, who grew up in a Buddhist family that his mother counted back 14 generations, no one in their family had ever followed another faith than Buddhism. This young man, his heart began to open up. And when he studied from those passages in Genesis about God as the creator, he said, these words are answering questions I have asked my whole life. As a little boy, my mother and the priest would tell me, we can't answer these questions. These aren't questions people ought to be asking. But this book is answering my questions. And eventually, he asked to pray. They hadn't got to the New Testament passages yet. But he prayed to the one who is above all. because of what he had learned in Genesis about the one creator. He came to faith. He put Jesus on in baptism. He reached out to friends. He reached out to his family. From the earliest days, he shared the Bible stories with his sister that he would often drive back and forth to school and home. He began to share them with his mother. His mother was curious at first, and then she was resistant. She used mockery. She berated him when things were going hard. Where's this God that you serve? And he was faithful. And he continued to pray. And he continues to pray that his mother's heart will be open to God's word. Why are we recommending Discovery Bible Study approach? Because we believe it's more reflective of Jesus' tactics when he was working with people out in the general public. He told stories and he often asked questions. The narrative sections of Scripture work far better in the discovery process. Someone asked the question about, most of the passages that you're talking about come out of the synoptics or out of the Gospels, not out of Paul's letters. Paul's letters are written to communities of faith. The Gospels are written to confirm the faith of those communities and to equip them with the story of Jesus that is about bringing people to faith. The discovery approach equips ordinary people to do extraordinary things. It empowers multiplication. The underground church in China isn't fueled and led on the front lines by the highly trained. It's led by ordinary men and women who have their fingerprints all over the Word of God. People who are learning to hear from God and to obey. We trained a team in Uganda, working especially with children, and eventually they were called up to work among a very resistant people. And they started discovery groups there. And when the pandemic brought the shutdown, the lockdown in Uganda, those small groups continued to meet. And there was a local pastor from a traditional church who'd been working among the same people group for a long time with very little benefit, very little fruit. And he went to one of the catalytic workers on the team and he said, "You must have received a word from the Lord." And the catalyst said, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" He said, "All of the strategies that you put in place appear to be pandemic proof. You don't gather people in these large groups. They're gathered in small groups. You don't depend on the powerful orators. It's ordinary people. Your work has been able to continue on where most of what we did has been shut down." The discovery approach, done well, nurtures powerful ownership. A lot of our traditional practices unintentionally nurture dependency, passivity, disobedience. because our actions do not communicate an expectation of obedience. What our actions over and over and over and over again communicate is that it's about gaining knowledge. We're not equipping people for Bible trivia championships. Ephesians 4, he gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers. Too often, that's where we stop. That's where we camp. That's where we focus. It's about knowledge. We want to clearly delineate what is an apostle, what is a prophet, what is an evangelist, what is a pastor, what is a teacher, what are those roles, which one am I, where do I fall on this spectrum, how do I use my gifts? And when we stop there, we've missed Paul's inspired point. He gave some to these functions to equip the members of the body for ministry. Who are your disciples? Are they becoming disciple makers? The final command, Matthew 28, 16 through 20. Go, or some translations, as you're going to play basketball, as you're going to work, as you're walking through your neighborhood, Jesus' directive, make disciples. Baptize them. Teach them to obey everything I have commanded you, and I'll be with you always to the end of the age. His promise of being present with us is in our going. Intentionally focused on making disciples. My time's up. I'll try to deal with a few questions. I apologize if I get too long in my answers. I want to be thorough, but I do promise that I will respond to those that are written.
John, thank you very, very much. I think that was very practical for us, very helpful, and it got under our skin. Just before I sort of point a couple of questions your way, I've sort of just had an inspiration to bring in a couple of people who I know have been working on this a little bit. So they're just here now, and we have Ken Peters from Winnipeg, who actually I know you have been talking to a bit over the last year. And we have Landon with an unpronounceable Polish surname, but he's from Vernon, BC. And I know Landon from visits there, and but he's been talking to Roy a fair bit. So I thought it might be helpful to all of us just to hear a couple of testimonies. I'm going to start with Landon. So tell me exactly what the process, Landon, you've been walking through over the last 12 months or so, and what it's done for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the process has been both very personal and quite corporate. So for me personally, probably 8 or 9 months ago, I came to the harsh realization that probably 98% of my relational energy was going into people who already knew Jesus. And I realized that there was very little chance of me actually making new disciples if that was the case. So I took a 1-day-a-week job at a coffee shop and started brushing shoulders with people in my community. And out of that started gaining friends who didn't know Jesus and started growing and having conversations with them, and yeah, sharing my life and what God was teaching me and doing in my life with them. So that's kind of the personal side. And I guess the corporate side is just been transitioning a lot of our young people away from kind of a one leader mentality in Bible studies to actually running a more DBS kind of structure. So, and I think that one of the cool things about that is we have 25 to 30 people who now are comfortable. Every week, someone different in each group is leading through the study. And people that were super quiet, really shy, if I asked them a question, they would stare at me blankly in a big group and have no response, are leading their group of 5 or 6 people through Discovery Bible Study and engaging and with scripture and stuff. So yeah, that, I don't know if that answers your question, but that would be a quick
okay. And so that DBS approach that you're doing with young people is a sort of preparation for them doing that with their friends, and that's what you're up to. This is a sort of pilot scheme. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's taking the DNA of how we are called to make disciples, starting that in the church, but we are starting to get, I would say, trickles of that starting to spread out, which is exciting. One of the guys that I met through the coffee shop has started kind of the process himself, and so we're starting to see some things happen kind of outside of the church, which is exciting as well.
Good. Now that's a sort of 8 to 9 month journey, so it's sort of early days really. So we can't sort of boast too much, but it's a start that you made, which is very encouraging.
Yeah.
And tell me, are your young people more excited than they were?
Yeah, I think I would say so. I hope so. I think our leaders, especially those people that I've entrusted to kind of like carry the vision for those groups, we're definitely seeing an excitement and a personal wrestling with them too, of how do I actually model this? Where's my community? Roy talks about owning the lostness for your community. So what for each of us, what does that look like? For me, it's the downtown of my city. It's we now run a coffee roasting business. So it's all the people that through roasting coffee that we sell to them in our city. It's those weekly and bi-weekly interactions that we're having with those people in those stores and in those cafes. That's the area of lostness for me personally that I'm owning. And I think our other leaders are grappling with that themselves too. What does that look like?
Great, Landon, thanks very much. And I can testify about the quality of your coffee, of course. But anyway, Ken, tell us a little bit about your journey. I mean, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, we've talked a little bit, but I'm not exactly sure where you're at in this, but I know you've been talking to John. What's your journey in this?
Yeah, I mean, it all started with of course, starting to read the books, and the books by Jerry Trousdale and David Watson and Roy Moran. And I just found myself strongly attracted to the model. I'd been in a pre-discipleship relationship with an unsaved guy in my neighborhood, and then his girlfriend got involved, and there were 3 of us, and then there was another guy, there were 4 of us, and I found myself in those conversations doing all the talking, and eventually those conversations ended up just reaching a dead end. Like they just lost interest, and I found myself really discouraged about that. And when I started reading the material about the Discovery Bible Study, I realized where I'd gone wrong and how those, and interestingly enough, it's just this past week, that I had lost connection with those people that I'd been doing all the talking with and praying for an opportunity to talk to them again. And suddenly they came back into my life recently, because I'd been praying, God, give me another opportunity so that I can meet with them again, but use the Discovery Bible Study. And the Discovery Bible Study is an opportunity to let them do the talking and let them do the discovering, because as Roy said, just listening to someone do a monologue is not necessarily as helpful to them as discovering for themselves. So we got very excited about that model. I got very excited on a personal level, just as Landon did. But on a corporate level, I was given responsibility to help with our small groups in our church. And one of the challenges we've been facing with the small groups in our church is that it had been very hard to recruit people to leadership, and people found it intimidating. And we also found that our small groups were very sort of stuck in the sense of not reaching out to people. They didn't necessarily have a model for how they could personally, in their everyday lives, reach out to people. And I found that this model, this Discovery Bible Study, gave me faith that this would be something people could find accessible as a model to use in their everyday lives to reach out to people. So we started introducing it. At first we thought, let's only introduce this to new leaders. But it became so, they embraced it so willingly. We started introducing it to our existing small group leaders, and they embraced it very willingly. And so we've provided training that takes all the pressure off them. It's almost like we say, look, this is not even leadership anymore. You're just facilitating something, and you're sharing that facilitation so that others in the group learn to facilitate. And you're not doing a study anymore. You're having a discovery time together. And when people started hearing language like that, it just took the weight right off their shoulders and gave them faith. I can do this. And in the past, I don't know how long, I don't know how many people had said no to leading a small group. But when we started asking people if they wanted to facilitate a small group and explained what we meant, people started saying yes. And we've got a handful of brand new facilitators now, where before there was just a dearth of new people wanting to take on small groups. And so we're beginning to use this model, and it's very early days. We're beginning to use this model. We've got a lot of training left to do. And it feels like the biggest paradigm shift for people who are adopting this model isn't actually the discovery rather than teaching model, but it's the obedience as opposed to just growing and understanding. And it's continually asking the question, how did it go putting this into practice last week? That's not something we're used to, because we're used to just focusing on learning as opposed to obeying. And that's a paradigm shift. And the other paradigm shift, which is even bigger, and which is, I think, what we're going to have to continually not just reinforce, but as John said, continually model. This is why I'm so excited this old friend of mine got back in touch with me last week so I can be modeling this, is that this looking for people of peace and sharing what you've learned. It's if we don't share what we've learned, we become a cul-de-sac, and that is not something we're used to. In Winnipeg, we have some pretty cold winters, and it's not easy to just talk to someone over a fence, you know. And so you have to be very intentional about looking for opportunities, praying for opportunities, and to not get discouraged when 9 people out of 10 don't show interest, because most people aren't people of peace. But when you find that person leaning in, you know that there's potential there. And so I've been leading we're about to plant a church, a congregation, and there's people on my leadership team who I've been discipling in this. And just last Thursday, we've made bookmarks like the one John represented or illustrated for us. And just last Thursday, one of the people in our group said, hey, there's someone at my work. Could I have one of those bookmarks? I want to just do maybe over a lunch hour or something with that person. And then another person in the group said, hey, yeah, there's someone I know that I'd like to use that bookmark with. And suddenly I can see multiplication happening. And I'm getting excited.
Yeah, you're getting excited, and I need to butt in just a little bit, but it's good to hear people who are excited. So Ken and Landon, thank you both for what you said. That's very helpful. It's good to hear illustrated some of the things that have been being talked about. I mean, John, 2 or 3 things that come out of Ken and Landon's stories. first of all, we do need non-Christian friends. I mean, that's step number one, isn't it? Which is sort of pretty basic, but it's a good one. And I mean, what we're not saying is that this is the silver bullet that, you know, really needs something. But what we are saying here is a tool that anyone can use, you know, if they're encouraged and if you know, in some ways we trust God to lead us in the process, but we're still following the Holy Spirit, aren't we?
Absolutely. That passage in Ephesians 4 haunted me. I mean, I was a pastor of a local church 31 years. I was trained and equipped. I have 2 master's degrees, a Bible college degree. I was in this maturity track. That's my upbringing. That's my life. That's how I came to faith. And yet I was not trained and equipped to equip ordinary people to do ministry. And so it is a tool, but it's a much better tool than anything I was ever provided for equipping members of the congregation to become ministers of the gospel. If the only tool we have is proclamation, we've limited ourselves greatly, because many of our people will never see themselves as proclaimers of the gospel.
Yeah.
Facilitators or discovery guides, they can envision themselves doing that.
Very good. Well, thanks very much, John. Thanks very much, guys, for sharing with us. I think that's very helpful sort of windows into some things that are happening. And whatever questions have come in, and we've had a number in again, John will answer on his blog. We're grateful, John, that, you know, for all this follow-up that you're going to give us, and thank you very much for what you have sown into us.